Crystal Lake presents Coffee Fueled Stories. Hello, hello, hello. It's me, Michelle, your host and pocket DJ of Coffee Fueled Stories. Today is a very special episode. It is Edgar Allan Poe's Death Day, and we are doing a special Poe themed episode with return guest, Mr. Matthew Mercier. Hello.
Hi, Michelle. Nice to see you.
Good to see you. So, you just returned from the Poe Festival. So again, this is all going to be Poe, like the whole episode is Poe Poe Poe. So I'm wearing my Poe t-shirt from the Poe Museum. I'm wearing my Poe socks from the
Nice.
Poe Museum. I have your book.
Nice.
And then I have this book is from 1985. Let's see if you can see it.
Hold up.
It is the works of Edgar Allan Poe, complete and unabridged. I got this when I was 15. My mom and I went to the local bookstore in our little teeny sleepy town, and she said I can buy one book.
Oh, wow.
And this was it.
That was it. Wow. That's fantastic.
Done. So I've had this, and it's got the gold edges and everything. I've had this since 1985.
That's fantastic. What is your favorite Poe story?
Ooh, that's a good question. They're all so different because he is the granddaddy of the detective series.
Yeah.
But I don't know. It's hard to say. You know what? It's probably the Telltale Heart because that was my introduction to him at 13, and my mind just.
It's a great one.
Yeah. What about you?
I am fond of the Mosque of Red Death.
Oh yeah.
It's pretty near a perfect story. But Telltale Heart is right up there. Telltale Heart, I always used to joke when I was giving tours at the cottage that Telltale Heart was Crime and Punishment in a page and a half, minus the Russian history and the Catholic existentialism, right?
I like that.
Well, I mean, and it's no mistake that he predates Dostoevsky. Poe was published that. It's basically a man who believes himself to be a Superman. He says he's going to kill someone. He ends up killing them. Justifies it, covers it up, brags about it to the police, and then is tortured by guilt. That's all in 2 pages. So it's basically the same story. But Dostoevsky just expanded this technology.
Yeah. Yeah. So when you were to let the new listeners know who might not be aware that you were the caretaker of the last home of Edgar Allan Poe in the Bronx, the Poe Cottage. And you had many experiences. So one of the reasons that you are back is because we talked about your book in the first episode, Poe and I, and your stories and the experience that you had there and getting to know you. But the reason that you're back is to share some Poe stories. And I only have one question right now because I figured as we get started, we do the you tell us these stories, I'll have questions, but I only have one question right now. And I'm dying to know this because you lived in Poe's home. And I don't know if you know the answer. I'm really hoping that you do. My one question is, did Poe drink coffee or tea or both?
Ooh, that is, I would wager that he drank tea. I hate to break your heart. I know you're a coffee guy, coffee person, but he very likely drank tea because he was so dirt poor when he lived at the cottage.
Yeah.
That coffee was if he could afford it, an extravagance, I'm sure. He likely, yeah, he likely drank tea, if anything. Mrs. Clem, Muddy, his mother-in-law, who lived with them at the cottage. I mean, they were chopping down. They were taking dandelions for food. I mean,
Wow.
that's what they were eating. So,
I
so I would wager that he drank tea. Um, but I do not know for certain what, what he drank. Certainly, absinthe and spirits were his vice. But that's an excellent question. I will have to. I was just at the Poe Fest in Baltimore, and I should have asked my Poe scholars that question.
Well, we talked about the little kitchen and how it was like, scary for you to try to cook in there. So that you went to the little cafe down the street. And so in my mind, I remember seeing pictures online of like the cottage.
Mhm.
And so it seemed like there was a kettle. It was probably a kettle for hot water. But I was like, I wonder if that was for coffee or tea.
Yeah, I mean, they probably had tea. They probably just had the basic tea because they lived in the country, the Bronx. If you wanted to go into the city, it was a huge endeavor. So I'm sure coffee was a luxury, something for the rich. So, but I don't know for certain. Don't quote me on that. So,
Okay, okay. Like I said, that's the only question that kind of came to mind as I was thinking of this show, because it's more of going to be you sharing some post stories,
mhm.
talking about your book some more, because it's like I said, this your book was thoroughly entertaining. I just it was such a wonderful way to meet you through words, and I didn't want I didn't want the first whole episode to just be me pumping you for Poe information. So
You can do that. I mean, that's what I'm here for. I'm not an expert by any means, but I did.
so
So,
I'm sorry. Was there is there a Poe story that you like? They wanted you to tell every time at the cottage?
you mean like a narrative?
Yes.
They were not. They were not too. I mean, obviously, I couldn't make things up, which I
Yes.
sometimes did. I would invent because I got tired of repeating the same facts over and over. When you're a tour guide, you get sick of hearing your own voice. You get sick of, abide. So somebody, and oftentimes the invented stuff would arise from somebody asking a question. So there's a lot of mythology around Poe, and I have to say, sometimes I was guilty of encouraging that mythology. But but they one of the biggest mythologies around him was that he was a drunkard, like an absolute drunkard. And that's simply, anytime that came up, I would dispel that myth because obviously he drank, but he wasn't a full blown alcoholic. He liked his alcohol, but Rufus Griswold, in his scathing biography of Poe after Poe died, exaggerated the drinking, exaggerated to ridiculous proportions. And nobody who produced as much work as Poe did in as short a time. He died when he was 40,
Yeah.
very short and horribly short. Even for the 19th century, it was short. So,
Yeah.
I mean, you could die of the common cold. So it's, making it to 40 was, but the fact that he produced so much work in such a short amount of time was remarkable. And nobody can do that, I don't think.
Yeah. So because there's so much we don't really know exactly, like his death is very mysterious, right? Like there's so much mystery behind his death, why he was wearing different clothes, why he was babbling, incoherently, um, and like you said, he was such a prolific writer. One of the things I heard was that he was an insane editor, that
Mhm.
he would just constantly edit and edit, like the Raven supposedly. And again, I don't know all of these details. These are only things that I've read or come across through various articles and things. I try to find credible sources, though. I try to make sure I'm not reading just some, trash magazine
Right.
talking about Poe.
Right.
But supposedly he was like an insane editor. Have you heard about that?
Yes. In fact, I have a book here. There was a great exhibit years ago. Can you see that?
Oh,
Um, Susan Jaffe Taine, where's her name? Yeah, Susan Jaffe Taine. She is a major Poe collector. She's one of the premier Poe collectors. If you follow this kind of thing, she has an incredible Poe collection of papers, and she has like one of the only. I think she may have two copies of Tamerlane, like the first edition of Poe's first work, which is it's one of the rarest books in American literature. It doesn't even have Poe's name on it. It just says Tamerlane by a Bostonian. So that's all it says. So so the manuscripts that she had, and so if this book is so there was an exhibit at the Morgan Library um, in New York many years ago, and it was she had manuscripts of his work. I don't know if there's lithographs in here, but no, not as many as I thought. But there was evidence of Poe editing, like extensively. And I have to say, just from a writer's perspective, like the Pit and the Pendulum, for example, there's no way somebody gets that story on the first draft. Like that story is so intricate with its language. So I would wager that he was a major. Any good writer is going to be a major draftsman. It's very hard for even a master such as himself to get something right on the first go. Like maybe maybe the Telltale Heart. I don't know, but it's even then. It's like the voice of the Telltale Heart is so well crafted and so
yes.
precise. Yeah, and that is not easy. He makes it look easy,
Yeah.
but he was a maniacal. He was devoted to his work, and he worked. He probably wrote every day and labored intensely. So that's what any good writer will do. The masters make it look easy. They make it seem simple. I guarantee that he edited and revised. I mean, just impossible not to get as good as he is. Yeah, I would wager, but I don't know for certain. Again, I'm not a scholar, but from all evidence, he seems to have revised and rewritten. Yeah,
And and that makes sense because like you said, like the Telltale Heart, like the pacing,
yeah,
his pacing is absolutely phenomenal. Like there's just that's one of my favorite things to do with his stories is just go in and just play around with the pacing of reading and think, okay, if it was read in this manner, how can you interpret it? If it was read in this manner, how can you interpret it? And so like Fall of the House of Usher. When I read that one, I'll read that one like I'll read that one slower, I should say. Not really slow, but slower.
no,
And
yeah,
just kind of really feel myself in that atmosphere, in that environment, as opposed to like Telltale Heart, like like that pacing, and you're kind of thinking of like the heartbeat, right? And how he's talking, and if you have that thump thump
so
thump,
thumb.
and so if you have, and he was brilliant with that, and with same thing with like never, or so I was gonna say Nevermore with the Raven,
Yeah,
um, and just like you said, his crafting was just superb, just
impeccable.
phenomenal.
Yeah, which makes him when you look at the stories of his counterparts, like Hawthorne is another one who was precise in his language, and like Young Goodman Brown is a perfect story. Like that story is such a tight parable. So he was an excellent master of shaving away the fat. He did not like long works. He did not like epic poetry. He hated Homer. He thought it was just so tightly controlled. Everything should have what he called a unity of effect, right? Every word, every syllable should contribute to the greater whole. So if you read like Pit and the Pendulum, for example, that's a story about a
Yes.
pendulum, like a blade. And if you read that story, the consonants and the S's and the C's, like you can hear like if you read it out loud, you can hear like the work your tongue has to do to get those syllables. It's got a rhythm to it. He really is. It's worth reading aloud. I saw a performance of The Cask of Amontillado. Amontillado. I always don't know if I'm mispronouncing it. Which is one I love that one too.
Yes, that one is that. So Telltale Heart and then Cask. Like
Cask of Amontillado. Yeah,
yes. Anyway,
perfect,
yes.
perfect stories. And that one's incredibly funny. If you go back and read, there's some funny lines in there. Black humor, like really dark humor.
Yes.
He's leading him down into the catacombs. He's like coughing. It's like, "Oh, I'm not going to die of a cold." And the villain says, narrator says, "No, you're not going to die of a cold." So it's it's so bleak and so dark. And what I used to teach that story for because that story is special, and it was special for its time, I think, because there's no explanation, there's no backstory, there's no nonsense about, well, here's why I'm doing this. It's just the guy tells you, I'm taking revenge, and it's all just the revenge. There's no, that's what makes it so scary. It's like you don't know why.
Yeah.
You think, oh, maybe he slept with his wife or something, but he could have just sneezed on him, and then this guy's psychotic. So it's an incredible story
Yeah.
for that reason. So cold,
Yeah.
cold and dark. So,
Yes. Yes. That was like I said, those two are like those are the stories, like because that was my introduction to him.
yeah.
Telltale Heart and then, Cask. And I just when I think about how again, when you get immersed into these stories and he was a journalism he actually did journalism for a while as well. He wrote for some papers and things, so that makes sense that and that's one thing like journalism they teach you that you have to be efficient with your words. Like
Yep.
that's the whole point of it, that you have this much space to tell a story, and it's a challenge, and so it makes sense that he was very masterful with each word,
Yep.
and just the man, just the man.
He's just yeah, I mean, I mean, yeah, I mean, there's really one of my other favorite stories, I don't know if you've read this one, this was a bit more obscure one, it's called The Man of the Crowd.
I don't know that one.
No, it's one of the more lesser, not lesser, but it's definitely, it's just basically existential dread. It's about a man who can't exist unless he's walking with a crowd. And to me, it seems to be about the persistence of evil. Like this man is just an enigma, and he's a killer of some kind, he's a criminal, and yet the hero is like, well, the narrator anyway is following this man through the various crowds of an anonymous city, I believe it is. I don't think he names the city, but it's just a creepy story because nothing really happens. He's just following this man, and he just knows there's something wrong with this person. So I always think of like those transgressive individuals in our society. I think of like killers or sociopaths, people who don't have a moral compass, or for whatever reason, there's always they're lingering, they're out there, and that's what makes them terrifying. Short of a miracle, we're not going to get rid of those personalities anytime soon. So if Poe like predated, he knew humanity's darker side, and so the Man of the Crowd is a good example of that.
Awesome. I'm looking to see if if a man in the crowd is in my book here. A man in the crowd. Oh, there it is.
Yep.
Oh wow. Sweet.
It's a really it's a tricky one. It probably doesn't get as much play because it's just an intricate. The language is thick. Like it's just there's no dialogue. I don't think it's just very very thick, and not a lot of incident. It's just a lot of his lesser known works are very philosophical, and they just take like the one he wrote about the cottage itself, Landor's cottage, about Poe. It's like a romanticized version of Poe Cottage in the Bronx. I've heard it called story as painting because it's just static. It's just really really dull. Honestly, it's just like, but it is just if you read it, it's like the details of the house, the flowers, you see and you smell and you feel everything, but nothing happens in the story. Just nothing. So, but it is just it's remarkable. His powers of description are something that very I don't know if a lot of writers feel the need to do that these days. But Melville, another one, you just see and feel everything is recorded for posterity. But they did a lot of that in the 19th century.
For sure. One of the things that I remember Stephen King saying, in order to be a good writer, besides being a good reader, you have to read a lot to be a good writer. Was he said you have to be a good observer,
Yeah.
because if you can't notice the speckles and the dots in something, then how can you describe it? And so, someone who is an excellent observer would be someone that would supposedly, again, if you go by this thought process, someone who's an excellent observer would make an excellent writer.
Yeah. No, that's and I love writers, and I try to be one. I try to you know I try to know the names of plants and animals. Right. I love books that get the names of obscure plants right. My wife, I think I mentioned this, is an herbalist. So she's always like, points to a plant, and if I say it, nope, that's that. This is ghost pipe, and that's lady slipper, and that's nettles, and so Poe knew the names of flower and fauna. And I think that's a very, again, I'm not sure, I don't see it as much there's writers of 19th century seem to pay more attention to those granular details. So knowing the names of nature, of flower and fauna is very powerful. Makes for very powerful and precise writing.
Absolutely.
You have to like the names of mushrooms are so important.
Right. I know.
The names of mushrooms. You want to hear something terrifying?
Yes.
Really terrifying. I was
Okay.
at an event last night. We have a great horror community here, and up in the Hudson Valley. I was at a real banger of an event last night with Ellen Datlow, who's like a major editor, and Laird Barron and Bracken McLeod, great writers, all of them. And Bracken told this story about AI. He's like, AI is huge right now. Obviously, we talked about what scared us, and we were talking about AI. So apparently, somebody produced an AI-driven guide to mushrooms, and it was like full of misinformation because the computer had just written it. Like it wasn't written by a human. Who a human would have known the names of things and proper. So this AI guide to mushrooms was out there. Somebody published it. It was on Amazon. People were buying it, and the mycological community was like, "Holy, we have got to get this off the shelf because people are going to die because they're misnaming these mushrooms." So naming something is a sacred act. You have to name something correctly. So.
Yeah, especially when something can kill you.
Isn't that terrifying? Like
Yes.
yeah, it was horrible. I was like, oh my god. As a mushroom guy, I was like, please God, like it's the worst possible. Yeah, so Poe would not have gotten the names of plants wrong.
No, no. Yes, that's it's very important, especially when you're um so like in my mind I think of hemlock, and you have white oleander.
Yeah,
The flowers themselves are lovely. You can touch the flower. There's no issue with touching the flower. But when you break it down and boil it and do these things, you can turn it into a poison.
yeah,
But again, just the flower itself, just hanging out on the bush, touching it, like safe, not an issue, not a problem. But mushroom, like you just have to be careful with what you touch out there, and we talked about that, when we were deep diving into mushrooms, because that can be very scary.
very scary. Yeah. So
Yeah,
you know your thing, but it's nature. Nature is not your friend. It's not your enemy. It just is. It just does what it does. So that's what. And Poe actually was a proto environmentalist. A lot of his writing, he would not industrialization. I think was very disquieting to him.
yes,
Yeah,
yes,
he did not enjoy the stink, and even though he relied on he had to be in the city.
yeah,
I don't think he would have chosen. So I think the Bronx, the time in the Bronx Cottage was so healing for him because he'd never lived in the country.
Absolutely, totally, and I'm glad that you said that because, um, it was like there's social commentary, buried in his stories,
Oh yeah,
and those are the things that we don't always, talk about. We talk about, the scary and the horror and the darkness and things of that nature, but excuse me, there is a social commentary. You can definitely feel the undertone of how he, the author, felt about that, um, the industrialization. Like it you know,
yeah.
it's dangerous. There was that undertone of danger there for sure.
Well, he also just he mocked people's the like a lot of he felt like that we were cut off, like American society in specific was cut off from more refined taste. Like he felt like Europe was more advanced in their taste, and he felt America was so loud and so. He was definitely a man out of place. Which is,
Yes.
yeah, and I don't. So it's not surprising that Baudelaire and the French embraced him because he just had like this European sensibility, even though he was writing in America. So,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah, that's it's funny because, I remember the first time, I was thinking about, if somebody asked me, like, "Who's your favorite American poet?" or "Who's your favorite American author?" And I always, Poe is one that comes to mind,
yeah.
and they're like, "Well, yes, but he had a very European sense about him," and I'm like, "But he was still American."
Well,
Like,
no, he was American. One of the funny stories about giving tours at the cottage was I would often get rival caretakers. So have I told you? I don't know if I told this story. So I was giving a tour once, and a guy shows up one afternoon. He's got like a bushy beard and glasses. And halfway through my spiel, he's like, let me just stop you. Let me stop you. Let me ask you something. Do you really consider Poe to be a major American poet? And I had never been asked. This was like the first time someone had asked my opinion as if I was a scholar. But I felt like I had to defend him. And I said, yes, of course he's a great American poet. And this guy said, well, I know you have to say that because you're here, you're working here. You have to puff Poe up and he's your man. And he's like, I understand that because I look after a historical house too. I was like, oh, really? He's like, yeah, and it's a writer's house, and I have to pump up my guy. I'm like, oh, pray tell, who is your author? And he says, oh, you might have heard of him. Goes by the name of Walt Whitman. Yeah. I was like, are you kidding me? So now, in reality, in history, like Whitman did not care for Poe. He felt that Poe was too dark. So like here it was like the modern incarnation. Here I was Poe and this guy was Whitman, and I was like pissed off. I was like, you cannot come into Poe's house and diss his name, because this guy was like Poe was a lesser poet. He was a jingle man. And I got pissed off, and I said, "Well, Walt Whitman never heard of a period. He just goes on and on. Song of Myself, Masturbatory." And it's like, so I didn't really feel that way, but I would just, I was like, "You can't say that about Walt Whitman." I was like, "Ah, welcome to the Bronx, pal. You can't come here and slander Poe. It's disrespectful." So that was actually not uncommon. Like I would get people who wanted to get into literary pissing contests. They would really get upset that I would defend Poe because Harold Bloom, the late great scholar, Yale scholar, hated Poe with a passion. I was always waiting for him to come by. I don't think he ever would, but I would have people come by and get angry with me, and like I would debate the merits of Poe's work. And I really, I was like, look, if you don't like him, why are you here? Like, just
yeah.
why are you here, man? People would just be looking for a fight. So it's
Wow.
strange. Yeah. I mean, but it was also just, you know, I would, my boss would get jealous of, say, the Washington Irving House, Sleepy Hollow.
Yeah.
They make I swear to God, half their city budget is for the Headless Horseman Festival, right? And to my mind, Washington Irving like wrote a couple of good stories, but he's nowhere near as memorable as Poe. If you put the two up, they're not even close. Like Irving was a historian and blah, but he was also a rich boy. He was a rich boy, and Poe did not have entree into that world. So, yeah, there's a famous 19th century portrait of like Washington Irving and Nathaniel Hawthorne. They're all like in these fine suit coats, and they're all sitting in chairs. Yeah, Poe would never have fit in.
Yeah.
He really, in that sense, he was goth. He was punk. I mean,
Yeah.
the popular image of him as a punk and a goth is not entirely accurate, but he was outside the normal. He did not run in literary circles, even though well, that's not true. No, take that back. He did go to literary salons and he wanted to be a part of the greater community, but he also saw the nonsense of it all. So I don't know. He was conflicted.
Absolutely. And like I said, the best part is, there's so many stories that like it just adds to I'm going to call it the coolness factor of his story, his life.
Yeah.
Um, uh, Again, I read somewhere that he did a reading of The Raven, and it was a literary reading, and as we know, people just lose their shit for The Raven. I mean, it's just like it's huge. Like I mean, it's beyond what I'm sure he ever expected. And at the time he did this reading, the people sat there and they just were not impressed. They just and he took it very personally. Again, I don't remember all of the books that I read, but I went through a period of where I read like various people doing Poe biographies, and this was where I read this one that he did this reading, and he was just so misunderstood, and he was just so hurt, and he was pissed, and he couldn't understand why people didn't get this poem and why it was, and I was just like, I could see that happening.
Which poem was that?
I'm sorry.
Which poem was that? You said that was the
It was The Raven.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That makes sense. Yeah, he was a sensitive soul.
Yeah. But I could see that too, and I'm sure like if you were to go to someplace and you did a reading from your book, and the response wasn't quite what you would expected, especially considering people are going to go there, they know that you wrote this story, it's about this type of thing. So like I said, I don't know, I went through many a Poe rabbit holes, just because I wanted to read what other people were saying and try to get to the truth of this man. My homeboy, as I call him, Poe is my homeboy.
Well, you should read it. There's a great book. Actually, one of the men who blurbed my book, Mark DeWittiak. DeWittiak.
Yes.
Yeah, I met him. I met up with him in Baltimore this weekend because he was a guest of honor at the festival. You should read his book. It's yeah, because he writes about Poe's death.
Okay.
It's a great book. It's an alternate timeline, kind of like my book. He goes back and forth with tracking Poe's last days, and
Yeah.
he debunks a lot of the mythology, and gives an accurate portrait of who he is, who Poe was. So it's
Awesome.
a great book. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, I'll check that out. Um, Before I forget, there was it Poe and the pitchfork or Poe and the rake, or there was something you were like, did I ever tell you about that? And I was like,
Pitchfork
no.
story. Yeah, that's God. So one of the questions I had before I moved into the cottage was about security. I said, you obviously have a security system here, right? They're like, oh yeah. So they had the gate, they had the padlocks, but I said the cottage itself, if I'm in the house, the security system isn't on. Has anyone ever broken into the house? And they said, no, it's pretty secure. So I took them at their word. But one night, occasionally I would have people on the porch getting drunk and whatever. So it wasn't like, but then one night I woke up to somebody pounding on the shed door. Like somebody was like really like wanted in. And you can't get into the park unless you scoot or climb over the spiked fence. So I was like, what? So this was like 2 a.m. And I was like frightened out of my wits. And so I walked out to the shed. I looked in the peephole, and it was a bunch of white kids who could only imagine were from Fordham University, right? Fordham University is very nearby, and they looked there, and I think one of them might have had a Fordham sweatshirt on. Otherwise, it was pretty obvious that they were these old college kids. I'm like, you all are going to get killed. You're out here drunk in the Bronx. Like, what are you? And they were just pounding on the door. They probably just wanted to go to the bathroom, but they kept at it. And I was like, all right, you fuckers are asking for this. Um, so I went, I was in this was in the shed. So I went and I got a pitchfork from the garden tool rack. And I waited until they were close to the door. And then I just like busted open the door and ran out with the pitchfork. And Michelle, I never saw people run so fast. They did not expect anyone to jump out at them, let alone and my hair was long at the time. So just imagine I was in my pajamas. I was like, I looked crazy. And I had a pitchfork. So I pulled like a Texas chainsaw on them. I was like, get the fuck! I came running out and screaming at them. My God, they dropped their wine bottle, smashed it all over, and they just like took off. And I felt so, it's a little cute little anecdote, but I felt so, my heart was racing. I felt so great. I was like, ah. But they never, I half expected them to come back to the cottage in the daytime, but yeah, I think I scarred them for life. They never did. So that was thrilling to be able to scare
That's
them.
that is awesome. Post pitchfork. I love it.
Like, yeah, man, you don't be. I mean, that was part of my job. You don't mess with. You don't bang on. They were banging on the door, and they were going to destroy it. And I was like, I would not have jumped out. I have to say, I would not have jumped out unless they were clearly like Fordham's, drunk college students.
Yeah.
So I was like, all right, snowflakes. So you need to be taught a lesson. So yeah, so but that was like nobody ever really messed with the cottage. They were right. People just didn't care. Uh, you couldn't be bothered, you know. So it's pretty well secure.
That's awesome. Talk about, I mean, that's like the ultimate defender story right there. I mean,
Yeah.
like
Nice.
it just doesn't get any better than that. Like post pitchfork. I mean, come on.
I mean, yeah, that's my favorite little night. There were a lot of freaky nights where I would hear noises and wake up and not know. It was a very disorienting place to live, and so I would not know like who was talking. I would hear stuff on the street. I would hear people arguing and screaming. And it's the Bronx, right? So it's a city, and it was always disquieting. Never knowing if I should get involved because nobody thought anyone was in the cottage. So I had the police on the lawn once looking for stuff, and I certainly didn't step out then
Yeah.
because I was afraid they would, you know, get surprised. Surprise them. So but overall, it was pretty. People pretty much left it alone. Yeah.
And you slept in the basement, right?
Yes, ma'am.
We all slept in the basement. Yes.
Yeah. I had a rat break in once. That was not fun. One time. I think that might have been towards the end of my tenure.
Did you, like, take any video or pictures? Like, do you have like, with you in there to, like, give a sense of size? Like, did my understanding is the cottage is pretty small. Like, it's not again, it's hard to tell because I only know it from online.
Yeah. Well, the basement apartment is as big as the top half of the cottage. It's not
Okay,
it's a sizable. I'd say it's about 500 square feet,
okay,
so it's not too small.
okay.
It's livable. I have like one or two pictures, but this was before cell phones. This was before I didn't. I might have a few shots of. I have a couple of shots of myself in the basement. I think right before I left, we had a blowout party. I invited all my friends that I had made over the last 4 years, and so I put out the invitation. I was like, once in a lifetime party in Poe's basement. So, and a lot of people came. I don't think I was supposed to do it. Just people came and they walked upstairs into the museum. I was like, just, please, please. Please. Um, I am leaving the job. So I think I did it when I left the job because I was like, I my Claudia, my wife, she was my girlfriend at the time. She's like, "You have to have a party. You can't leave that house and not have a rager where you go." And people were like chomping at the bit to come. I had one friend who was like, "I can't make it." I was like, "That," you know. So it was like, yeah, it was a. I wish you could have come. I wish you. It was a.
I would have loved, like I said, I didn't even know I didn't even know about the cottage until, like, for some reason my brain didn't. I only associated him with, um,
Baltimore and
uh,
Philly.
Richmond, Virginia, and Baltimore. Like, those, for some reason, my brain just only associated those 2 places with him. I had no idea he lived in the Bronx. I had no idea. Like, how do I not remember that from some of the stuff that I read? Like,
I had no idea until I got the job. Someone told me, "Oh, you should go live in Poe's place in the Bronx." I'm like, "What? What are you talking about? You live in Baltimore and Philly. No, the propaganda, Poe propaganda, or the anti-pro. I don't know. Yeah, they don't mention the Bronx. The Bronx doesn't
yeah,
get as much play as
yeah,
Baltimore. Yeah,
yeah.
man, Baltimore's got it going on. I just that festival. It's only 7 years. You know, they almost lost their Poe house. Did you know that?
No, I was gonna say, so what happens at the Post Festival?
So I think it basically now it functions. So back in 2011, the city defunded the Poe Museum. I forget that must have been after the financial crash. So maybe, but so they defunded. There's going to be no more funding for the Poe Museum in Baltimore. So people were distraught.
Yeah,
Yeah. So now,
Baltimore Ravens.
right. This was after the Ravens, and it's just like one of the major Poe touchstones. So landmarks, and so you don't defund your gravy train because
Mm-mm.
if 4,000 people, it's not a huge. So I think the Poe Festival is pretty much serves as a major fundraiser for people. But so the cottage, I mean the house is now saved. I don't think it's not gonna get knocked down, and they're developing this visitor center, and it's gonna be yeah, they're really kind of a model for how to save one of the best parts of their city. And for many years, there was the you're familiar with the Poe Toaster?
I saw that when I was Googling, and I was like, "Oh, we've gotta talk about that."
Yeah. So the Poe Toaster, for those that don't know, for many, many years, someone came to Poe's. Well, so yeah, so there's a gravesite, Westminster Church in Baltimore. I believe it's Westminster.
Yes, Westminster Presbyterian, I believe?
Yeah. So there's a where he is buried. For many years, the Poe Toaster, they called him the Poe Toaster, would show up in a hooded cloak and with a bottle of cognac and 3 roses because
Yep.
Poe was buried there next to Virginia and Maria Clem. They're all so they would come, pour a little cognac, and give a little toast to Poe. So they would always show up on January 19th, Poe's birthday.
Poe's birthday, yes.
Yeah. So I had wanted to see this for many years. But of course, it's not like something you can't plan for it because there was no telling when this person would show up. As soon as um, January 19th started, like at midnight, the clock would start ticking, and they could show up anywhere between midnight and sunrise. So my friend Tim and I drove down, and we said, "All right, we're gonna go. We're gonna sit outside, and we're gonna wait. We're gonna see this. We're gonna see the toaster." So we got there. We parked on the street. We were right there outside the graveyard. And I think it got to like, I mean, it was freezing cold. There was a snowstorm coming like the next day.
Oh,
So but it was bitter. It was like -5. And we're just sitting there with our coffee. And we got to like 12:15. We got to 12:30. We didn't make it to 12:30. And we're like, oh, this was a bad idea. We're gonna sit out here all night. So we were doubting our sanity. But then people started coming, like a bunch of people started coming and showing up. And so we felt like encouraged because it was now like solidarity. Everyone's like, we got to see. So you had like a small clutch of people, but we're like, we can't. Like how I was like, I'm tired. Like how are we gonna last until 6 a.m.? So we're standing there. We're all like clustered around, because you can't get into the graveyard. You have to wait outside.
Right.
Only a select few. Jeff Jerome, the curator, allowed some people into the church because Poe's buried in the back. The actual graveyard, grave site's in the back of the church. You can't see it, and there's a tunnel under the church. So the toaster would come and go under the tunnel and go into the backyard. So we're sitting there, just chatting, and then I look up at the corner, like about 1:15. So an hour and 15 minutes into the night. I look up at the corner, and there's a guy in a hoodie who comes walking around the block, and I didn't think anything of it, and then I realized, oh, this is him. So he just comes walking around. Everyone's like freaking out, and sure enough, he pops down, goes into the tunnel, and now, though, the problem is once he goes into the tunnel and it's in the graveyard, there's no way out unless somebody opens the gate. Right? You have to get out of the graveyard. You have to. So Jeff Jerome, the curator of the Poe Museum, assists the Poe Toaster. He unlocked the gate for the guy, and of course he had to misdirect this little crowd of people trying to accost, trying to like mug the guy or like try to discern who his identity was. Right? They were at. He's like, you go to that entrance. You go to that entrance. So everyone's like covering the bases, right, and trying to figure out where this guy is going to exit the graveyard. And Jeff Jerome comes out, and he's like, he went that way. Like he turns to the opposite, and all these fools like rush to the other side. I'm like, that clearly was a misdirect. I didn't want to disrupt the ceremony. Right? We got to protect this guy's identity. So he just misdirects everybody. Everybody rushes to the other side of the graveyard, and then sure enough, Poe Toaster like runs out, and this runs down the block, and his identity was saved. So that so every year people would try to do that. People would try to like tackle the toaster. And how's that for tackle the toaster? So for years, Jeff Jerome protected the identity of this person because every year people would try and lift a go call. Like, who are you? Like, why do that? So, but that tradition sadly has ended.
Oh.
Yeah, it ended. I think it might have ended on the 50th anniversary of the. Yeah, so it's no longer. So that's that. So, but I did witness it, and I was happy to witness it.
That is so cool. That is so cool. I just, like I said, it's crazy how, well, and social media can do good things and it can also do bad things, depending on which direction, it's used.
Yeah. I cannot imagine what this ended before the advent of social media. I cannot imagine how it would have gone, how the identity would have been, somebody would have done something.
Yeah. That's so cool. That is so cool. One of the images I used was the grave site with the 3 roses and the bottle of cognac for the promo this morning, and I was like, "Ooh, we got to talk about that." So thank you for that. That was awesome.
Sure.
Like I said, that he just there's so much lore. There's so much lore behind this guy, and the fact that we have it, and his and the 5 words that he said just before he died, Lord help my poor soul.
Yes. Yeah.
Like,
so
what?
So mysterious.
Yeah, and the fact that he was not in the right clothes, again, there's so much that we just don't know.
No, he's got one of the greatest literary exits in all of literary history, as this guy Mark, who blurbed my book, pointed out. Poe has one of the great exits of all time.
Yeah.
Second only, he thinks, to Mark Twain, because Mark Twain was born when Halley's Comet circled the Earth.
Yeah.
And Mark Twain said, I'm going to die when Halley's Comet comes back. And sure enough, he did. He died the same year. So So Poe, yeah. You know who was at the festival this year was Victoria Price.
Yes,
She,
that's
she was
awesome.
there. They had a screen, and you know who was supposed to be there was Roger Corman, but he died in May, and
Yeah.
they had a screening of the Mask of Red Death.
Ah,
And they talked a lot about the mythology, and there's a lot of people who say that the Roger Corman films are contributed to the popularity of Poe because those films were huge.
oh yeah, yeah. He did an amazing job with
Yeah.
those movies and the stories. Yeah, yeah. Excuse me. Um, I wanted to ask you in regard to the festival. Do people are there like do they have readings? Like, isn't there like an Edgar Award? I know there's like Shirley Jackson has an award for literature. Are there Edgar Awards? Do they do that kind of stuff there as
They
well?
do, yeah. They have, well, the Edgar Awards are with the Mystery Writers of America.
Okay,
That's something completely separate.
okay,
They do have an awards. It's called the Saturday Night Visitor Award. You can look it up, and anyone can enter a work that is either inspired by Poe or an adaptation of Poe's work. There's two different categories. So obviously, I'm going to throw my hat in the ring next year.
yeah. I was just gonna say, did you throw yours in?
I didn't my work didn't qualify this year, but certainly so the entry I think every January 19th
Okay,
that's when and then they decide the nominees by May. So yeah, it's a nice little award. I'm not it doesn't have like the visibility that the Edgars do, but why not? Um,
yeah.
there's a mask there's a the Black Cat Ball. They had this big. If you go to the awards ceremony, like so it's a big party. It's just like really, it's just a lot of people who love Poe. They show up like there were just like people there making coffins, like showing people how to make coffins like the old-fashioned way. There are people, musicians. It's kind of and then people selling like all kind of Poe tchotchkes, things like that. There's booze, there's food. It's a really great little. It's free to the public, so it's a great little festival. So
That's really cool.
yeah,
That's really cool.
and they're renovating. The best thing I think is that they're community minded, and so the Poe Museum, of course, was traditionally in a very impoverished neighborhood, which is now gentrifying, but they are taking care of the people that live there. They're going to rebuild a lot of those homes, and they're not going to toss people out. So they have a commitment, I think, to the neighborhood. So,
Very cool.
so that's cool. Yeah.
Very cool. One of the last things before we go, and I know you had talked about, you know, the stories behind his, supposed drinking and things of that nature. I didn't know that they did this. I just read this morning as I was googling and looking for talking points and things of that nature. I guess they have a toenail clipping that they've done some DNA testing
Hmm.
on, and it confirms that he didn't have certain things that they are saying, and alcoholism. They were saying like no, like he didn't have, because there's various things that they say how what he died from, and they basically were because of his toenail clipping and the DNA testing, they were able to rule out these things, and I was like, we have a toenail clipping.
I know it's amazing. They have a strand of his hair. Well, you gotta come to the Richmond Museum. The Richmond Museum has got all this stuff. I think that might be where the toenails were. No, maybe the toenails in Baltimore. Did they say?
I didn't catch that. All that caught my attention was they did DNA testing on his toenail, and that's like where I stopped. I was like, "What? We have a Poe toenail?" Like,
Yeah, I wouldn't doubt that they do. And they dug them up.
yeah,
You know about that? They dug him up years later when
yeah,
they
he was moved.
moved. Yeah.
Yeah,
So they have a lock of his hair too at the Richmond Museum, and yeah, so that makes sense because he again the alcohol is kind of exaggerated. He wasn't as prominent as Rufus Griswold claimed it to be. But so yeah, that's I have to. Yeah, I remember reading about that. I have to go and
I'll see if I can find the link and send it. Like I said, I was doing random Google searching like Poe death, Poe mysterious death. But and I was trying to find like valid. I went to like Britannica.com.
nice.
I wanted to make sure that whatever news source I was looking at wasn't like the Daily Mail or National Enquirer, something along those lines.
There's a lot of misinformation out there about Poe
Yes.
on the internet. Surprise. So yeah, but there's a lot of mythology, but just a regular dude just had a vivid imagination.
Right, right, and I love that we celebrate him, like, and I love that you lived in his house and that you had, like, and, like, in my mind, like, the Poe Pitchfork, like, I seriously see a short story. I see a little mini movie out of that, like, I see a little mini, like, picture video out of that, like, that just sounds awesome, like, Defender of Poe,
Defender of Poe, yeah. I did have a filmmaker contact me about making a short film about one of my moth stories. Um, but the cottage is under renovation right now, so it's not as aesthetically pleasing. But but yeah, no, there. I think the Poe possibilities are endless.
yes.
I mean, I'm gonna promote this book as long as I'm able. Uh, until I'm because I think Poe is evergreen. I think people are always fascinated by him, and it never fails that when I tell people I'm doing a reading in a graveyard this weekend, so that's pretty cool. Um, the local town historian asked me to do it, so it's perfect.
That is so freaking cool. Like, and I can't get enough of this book. It's freaking, and the title alone, Poe and I mean, there's all, like I said, I told you this in the first episode. All I have to hear is Poe, and I'm like, yes, like
Yes, yeah.
you have my attention. Yes,
I don't think you're alone. Um,
right.
I don't think you're alone.
No,
Though my title is grammatically incorrect, but I don't care.
thank
'Cause
you for saying that. Thank you for saying that.
I don't care. I got to make a video about that because people have been asking me. It's like, the title is incorrect. Like, I don't, it just, yeah, the alternate titles were not good. No.
Can you tell us what those were? Can we end with a couple of questions about related to you and that?
Below the House of Poe, which I thought was too cumbersome. Poe's Basement was another one, which I liked, but my agent at the time did not like it. Um, Sundays in the Park with Poe, that was a joke. I was like, that doesn't make sense. Um, Poe yo, like the Spanish version. Just none of it sounded like none of it sounded good. No. So I
Oh
settled on Poe and and I was like, I don't care if it's grammatically incorrect.
my god. Yeah, it's perfect. It's just perfect. And then uh the I love on the inside you have, the inscription. I don't know if it's going to come out,
Oh,
but
that
yes.
I scratched out I, right?
Yeah, and then put Matt. I love those.
That was the first time I did that.
That was awesome.
I thought, "This is how I'm gonna," and that's how I signed it last night for somebody. I just scratched it out and
Yeah.
just said, so it's, like, perfect because that was really me and him, so, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and like I said, on the fact that today is, his death day, and so there's all of these, correlate. I was like, and we didn't get it. Like I said, I didn't want the whole episode, the first episode, to just be me asking you and pumping you for Poe, details and stories, because we're talking about your book, and so I wanted to get to know you and your book and your process. And then when you were like, "Hey, you wanna hear some Poe stories?" And I was like, "Hell yeah!" Again, Poe,
Well,
yes,
we barely scratched the surface, but people can go to The Moth and listen to the other stories. Um, yeah, it was a great time in my life, but, um, but it's not a place you can stay forever, so you have to move out
no,
at some point.
yeah, yeah, and like I said, it was perfect to have you back on today to talk about Poe stories and share your Poe adventure. So on that note, I want to say thank you for hanging out. Thank you for being such a wonderful guest to do a repeat, to do the Poe themed show and share your stories about Poe and your love of Poe and sharing that you lived there. Like I said, the fact that you live there is just. I wish I could just be like I want to touch you and just be like you lived where Poe lived.
Well, someday, Michelle, thank you so much for being you. This has been like the fact that you love the book so much. I obviously wrote the book for you or somebody like I
Yeah, I
wrote.
was like
Yeah,
me,
yeah, no, I wrote the book. Obviously, I mean, I said
Poe lovers.
someone else is going to love this besides me. And the fact that you have embraced it and just love it so unabashedly, and I just that warms my heart. That's what every writer wants. Even if you just satisfy one person, it makes your day. So, I mean, I have satisfied, and people have been saying similar things to you, but you were the first to really just kind of embrace it and say, "This is." So that is, it's been a huge boost. I can't tell you, like to my confidence and to my psyche, and just it's made this whole experience like really wonderful.
That being said, I know you've been standing on your feet in the barn for over an hour now,
Good,
so
good for you.
we are done. Gosh, what is going on right now? So I know the tagline for the show is "Go forth and be magical," but because today is Poe's Day, I was wondering if we should sign off with some sort of Poe verbiage of some sort.
Verbiage. What would be appropriate? Um, you know that he's got a famous. He's like, I'm a poet to a T. You just have to add a T to my name. You see, something like that. That's not quite. You can't sign off like it, but that's my favorite Poe quote. But let's see. What could we sign off with? God.
Well, I mean, I don't want it to sound so morbid. Lord help my poor soul.
No, like,
Is 'cause this is an homage. Like this is we're honoring him, you know. So
go forth and be weird. Let's just make something up because I think
oh,
that's what Poe is,
go
right?
forth and be spooky. Go forth and be.
Spooky, go
Oh,
forth and be weird. Yeah. Go forth and be goth, go forth and be punk because that's what Poe would want you to do. So,
I
you
love it. I love it.
listeners can choose whichever one they want.
Okay, we'll leave it at that. I'll have them do the. I'll leave that as which one is your favorite
Favorite.
for Poe. So let's do a. How about you go for? Why don't you do a sign us off with "Go forth and be weird," and then pause, and then do like hit those three: weird, spooky, and goth. Please.
Go forth and be weird. Go forth and be spooky. Go forth and be goth.
Yes.